It was one of those nights when everything felt just a bit off-kilter. The kind where every decision seemed to teeter on the edge of chaos. I found myself at a party I hadn't even planned to attend, surrounded by faces I barely recognized, with a drink in hand that wasn't quite strong enough to drown out the tension simmering beneath my skin. It was the kind of tension that had been building for months, ever since Chloe, my ex-best friend, had done what she did. Chloe and I used to be inseparable. We were those annoying friends who finished each other's sentences and had a million inside jokes. But everything changed last summer when she started dating Ryan. It wasn't the fact that she was dating someone new, it was who she was dating. Ryan had been my friend first, one of my closest, and somehow when they got together, Chloe decided it was time to cut me out of her life. Just like that, I was ghosted, left to piece together what the hell had happened. So when I saw Ryan across the room, standing by the bar like a beacon in the crowded chaos, something inside me twisted. He was laughing, that familiar easygoing laugh that used to make me feel so at ease. But now it just reminded me of what I'd lost. I watched him for a moment, the room buzzing around me. The decision I made next wasn't planned, not really. It was more like an itch I needed to scratch. A small petty act of revenge that seemed so trivial and monumental all at once. What was the worst that could happen? I took a deep breath, feeling the bass of the music vibrate through the floor and up my legs. I wasn't drunk, not yet, but I wasn't sober either. I had just enough liquid courage to approach Ryan. I weaved through the crowd, my resolve hardening with each step. "Hey Ryan," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He turned, and for a split second, there was a flicker of surprise in his eyes. Then he smiled, the kind of smile that used to make me feel like the most important person in the room. "Hey, long time no see," he replied, like nothing had changed. Like we hadn't lost whatever it was we had. I forced a smile and took a sip of my drink, feeling the cool liquid slide down my throat. "Yeah, it's been a while," I said, trying to sound casual, as if my heart wasn't pounding in my chest. "How's everything with Chloe?" He shrugged, swirling the ice in his glass. "It's going well. She's, doing her thing. Busy with work." There was a pause, and I could tell he was thinking of what to say next. He looked around, almost like he wanted to change the subject. "How about you? How's life treating you?" I hesitated. I could have played nice, could have kept things light. But the resentment was bubbling up, and before I could stop myself I said, "Life's been complicated. Losing friends tends to do that." His smile faltered. "Look, I never meant for things to get awkward between us." His voice was earnest, but it only fueled the fire in my chest. "Awkward?" I echoed, my voice rising slightly. "Ryan, it wasn't just awkward. Chloe dropped me. You both dropped me." There was a tremor in my voice that I couldn't quite hide, but somehow it felt good to finally say it out loud. Ryan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It wasn't like that. Things just got." He trailed off, searching for the right words. "Complicated. You know how Chloe is." "Yeah, I do," I replied sharply. I thought I did anyway. I took another sip of my drink, the alcohol doing little to dull the edge of my emotions. For a moment we just stood there, the party swirling around us, as if we were in a bubble of our own unspoken history. I could feel the weight of lost time pressing down on us, the words we hadn't said, the explanations that never came. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the guilt etched on his face. Part of me wanted to forgive, to move on, but another part, the part that had been nursing this grudge for months, wasn't ready to let go. "What would you do?" I wondered, glancing at the reader of this confessional moment. I was about to say something, maybe something I'd regret. But then another voice cut through the noise. "Hey Ryan." Chloe appeared out of nowhere, her hand slipping into his like it belonged there, which I guess it did now. "Hey," he said, turning to her with a smile, one that didn't quite reach his eyes. "We were just talking." Chloe looked at me, and for a moment there was a flash of something in her eyes, recognition, maybe regret. It was gone as quickly as it had appeared. "Oh hey," she said, her tone polite but distant. Like we were acquaintances, not two people who once knew each other better than anyone. "Hey," I replied, trying to match her tone but failing miserably. The tension was palpable. An uninvited guest that had barged into our conversation and refused to leave. I knew I should walk away, let it go. But something in me pushed back, stubborn and relentless. "I was just catching up with Ryan," I said, forcing a smile. She nodded, her eyes flicking between us. That's nice. It's been a while. Yeah, it has, I said, the words heavy with everything left unsaid. The three of us stood there, caught in a triangle of awkwardness, until finally Chloe broke the silence. Well, we should get going. We have to meet some friends. I nodded, my throat tight. Yeah, sure. It was nice seeing you both. And with that, they turned and melted back into the crowd, leaving me standing there with a mix of relief and bitterness swirling in my chest. As they disappeared, I felt the urge to follow, to demand answers, but something held me back. Maybe it was the realization that closure doesn't always come the way you want it to, or maybe it was the understanding that some things are better left unresolved. I was sitting on the damp porch steps of my friend Jenna's house, the chill of the fall air creeping through my jeans. The leaves were vibrant shades of orange and red, scattered across the lawn like nature's confetti. Jenna's voice echoed from inside the house, mingling with laughter and the clinking of glasses. It was Saturday night, and Jenna's place was where everyone wanted to be. I had been friends with Jenna since high school. She was the kind of person who could light up a room with her energy and charisma. People naturally gravitated towards her, myself included. I wasn't the life of the party like she was, but I liked being close to someone who was. It made me feel seen, like I mattered in a group that often overlooked the quieter ones. The party was in full swing behind me, but I needed a moment alone. I had just received a text from my ex Tom. We hadn't spoken since our messy breakup a few months ago. Seeing his name pop up on my phone sent a jolt through me. A mix of nostalgia and anxiety. The message was simple, just a "Hey, how've you been?" But it felt loaded with unspoken words. My instinct was to respond immediately, to dive back into the familiar comfort of our old conversations. But a part of me hesitated. What would Jenna say? She hadn't liked Tom much. Thought he was too controlling and not good for me. "You're better off without him, Mia," she'd said more than once. Still, a small voice inside me craved the validation that came with Tom's attention. I tucked my phone back into my pocket, determined to ignore the message for now. There was a mix of music and chatter filtering through the open door, and I could hear Jenna's laugh, distinctive and warm. She was probably in the kitchen, orchestrating one of her famous cocktails. As I re-entered the house, the warmth wrapped around me like a familiar blanket, contrasting sharply with the crisp air outside. The room was a swirl of familiar faces and a few new ones. Jenna caught my eye and waved me over. "Mia, there you are," she called, her eyes bright with the thrill of hosting. I squeezed through the crowd, reaching her side. She handed me a drink, a concoction of who knows what, but it was sweet and tangy. "You disappeared on me. Everything okay?" she asked, concern flickering in her eyes. She was always good at noticing when something was off. "Yeah, just needed some air," I replied, trying to sound casual. I wasn't sure if I should tell her about Tom's message. Would she see it as a betrayal if I even considered responding? The thought gnawed at me, a quiet unease that I couldn't shake. Jenna nodded, accepting my answer, but her eyes lingered on me for a moment longer, as if she wanted to probe further. Instead, she changed the subject, pulling me into a conversation with a group gathered around the kitchen island. They were talking about the upcoming Halloween party, throwing out ideas for costumes. I tried to focus, to be present, but my mind kept drifting back to my phone. The desire to respond to Tom was strong, like a siren's call. It wasn't just about him, it was about feeling wanted, remembered. But what would that mean for me? Who was I if I kept running back to the past for validation? The party continued around me, a blur of laughter and music. Jenna was in her element, her smile infectious as she flitted from group to group. I admired her, envied her ability to be so unapologetically herself. That was the kind of confidence I wanted, the kind I was afraid I'd never truly have if I kept seeking approval from people like Tom. As the night wore on, I found myself at a crossroads. My phone buzzed again in my pocket, a reminder that the decision was still there, looming. Did I want to risk my friendship with Jenna over a text conversation with someone who was part of my past? Or was I willing to face the discomfort and possibly let go of something that no longer served me? I glanced around at the people who had become my chosen family, the ones who cared for me as I was, not for who I used to be. It was time to decide what mattered more: keeping their trust or indulging in a fleeting moment of recognition from someone who once knew me well but didn't know me now. The gym was buzzing with the usual weekday energy, filled with the clatter of weights and the rhythmic pounding of treadmills. I hesitated at the entrance, feeling the familiar tug of nerves tightening in my stomach. Jenna had mentioned she'd be here around this time for her yoga class, but it wasn't her I was here for. I scanned the room, my gaze skimming past the clusters of students and faculty until it landed on Ryan. His back turned as he adjusted the settings on a rowing machine. I hadn't spoken to him in over a year, since before everything went down with Jenna. But there he was, the same as ever, with that easy confidence and the faintest trace of a smile that seemed permanently etched on his face. My heart did a little flip and I hated myself for it. I was supposed to be over this by now, wasn't I? But standing there I felt the old familiar pull, like a thread unwinding between us. "Hey, stranger." I kept my voice light, trying to mask the swirl of emotions. Ryan turned, surprise flickering across his features before he broke into a grin. "I didn't think I'd see you here," he said, wiping his brow with the back of his hand. "It's been a while." "Yeah, just thought I'd mix things up," I replied, trying to sound casual. But inside, a tumult of old feelings bubbled up, threatening to spill over. This was supposed to be a simple reconnection, nothing more. But the way he looked at me made it feel like something else entirely. I was about to suggest grabbing a coffee when I caught sight of Chloe out of the corner of my eye. She was on the elliptical, her gaze flicking between us with an intensity that made my skin crawl. Chloe had always been a bit of a wild card, and I knew she still had feelings for Ryan. The last thing I wanted was to get tangled up in that mess again. Ryan must have sensed my hesitation because he stepped a little closer. "You okay?" he asked, concern lacing his voice. "Yeah, just remembering some things," I said, offering a tight smile. "How have you been?" We fell into an easy rhythm, talking about the mundane details of life since we last spoke. It was like slipping into a favorite old sweater, comfortable, familiar, and warming me from the inside out. The tension in my shoulders eased, and I found myself laughing at his stories, the sound ringing out over the clamor of the gym. But as we talked, I couldn't shake the feeling that Chloe's eyes were boring into my back. I shifted, trying to ignore it, but it was impossible to forget the past. She and Ryan had a brief thing, and though it was ages ago, some part of me wondered if she still harbored hopes. "Want to grab a coffee after this?" Ryan asked, breaking into my thoughts. His eyes were steady on mine, and for a moment it felt like nothing had changed. "I'd like that," I said, surprising even myself with the quickness of my response. Ryan nodded, and we settled into a comfortable silence. Yet, beneath the surface I felt a storm brewing. Here I was, on the cusp of reigniting old flames while another potential fire smoldered nearby. It was risky and I knew it. But maybe, just maybe, this was a chance worth taking. What would you do? Stay in the safe zone or dive into the storm, knowing the consequences? Back in my dorm room, I found myself sifting through a pile of old papers and textbooks, trying to tidy up. It was a feeble attempt to distract myself from the whirlwind of emotions that had stirred up after seeing Ryan. As I absent-mindedly sorted through the clutter, my hand brushed against something familiar. A small stack of old text messages I had printed out long ago. Curiosity piqued, I sat cross-legged on the floor and began to read through them. These texts were from Ryan back when we first met during our freshman year. It was strange seeing his words after all this time. The messages were filled with the typical banter of two friends getting to know each other. Jokes about our professors, complaints about sleepless nights, and random thoughts exchanged in the wee hours. But as I read further, I noticed something I hadn't before. The tone of the messages shifted subtly. Ryan had always been attentive, but there was a layer of warmth in his words that I had missed back then. "Hey, saw this and thought of you," he texted, attaching a picture of a funny cat meme I'd loved. Or, "You looked really nice today at the coffee shop," which I'd brushed off as a casual compliment. Each message now seemed to carry a weight I hadn't recognized in the moment. A specific text caught my attention. "I really enjoy our late-night conversations. It feels like I can talk to you about anything." Reading it now, I couldn't help but wonder if there had been more to his words. Had Ryan been dropping hints that I was too blind to see? My heart raced as I continued to piece together these old fragments of our past. Was it possible that he had liked me all along, just as I had secretly harbored feelings for him? The realization hit me like a tidal wave. All those times I had dismissed my feelings as one-sided suddenly felt unjustified. There had been a spark, an undercurrent of something deeper, And it hadn't been just in my head. What if things had been different? What if I had noticed these signs back then? As I sat there surrounded by the remnants of my past, I felt a strange sense of validation. My feelings, which I had long buried, seemed to rise to the surface, raw and undeniable. I was justified in feeling the way I did, and knowing that changed everything. The question now was what to do with this newfound insight. Should I confront Ryan about it? Or let sleeping dogs lie, as they say? The idea of bringing it up terrified me, but there was also a part of me that longed to know the truth. I heard a knock at the door, pulling me back to the present. My roommate was back, her presence a reminder that life beyond this room continued. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted within me. I was on the verge of discovering what could have been, and possibly what still could be. Would you dig deeper into the past? Or let the present guide you? The uncertainty loomed, and yet excitement brewed alongside it. The party was in full swing, laughter and music filling the air. I spotted Ryan across the room, drink in hand, talking animatedly with some people I vaguely recognized. My heart skipped a beat, but I reminded myself why I was really here. Chloe was attached to his arm as usual, hanging on his every word. It was time for some petty revenge, just a little something to make him feel what I'd been feeling. I mingled, grabbed a drink, and let the rhythm of the party guide me closer to them. Every joke, every laugh I faked felt like a step towards my goal. Ryan's eyes caught mine for a brief moment, and I saw something flicker there, curiosity maybe? He glanced away, returning his attention to Chloe, but I'd seen enough. As the night wore on, the crowd thickened, and the room seemed to pulse with energy. I watched, waiting for the moment when Chloe would drift away, perhaps to the bar or the bathroom. It didn't take long. A friend of hers appeared, beckoning her over, and she reluctantly let go of Ryan's arm. He stood there, looking a bit lost without her by his side. I waited a beat before moving in, casually slipping into the space Chloe vacated. "Hey Ryan," I said, keeping my tone light. He turned to me surprised but smiled. "Hey, I didn't know you'd be here. How's it going?" I shrugged, letting my eyes linger on his just a second too long. "You know, just the usual party chaos. How about you?" We chatted, the conversation flowing more naturally than I'd expected. There was a comfort, a familiarity that made it easy to relax. But I had a mission, and I couldn't let myself get too swept up in the nostalgia. "Do you want to step outside for a bit? It's kind of loud in here," I suggested, trying to sound nonchalant. He nodded, finishing off his drink. "Yeah, sure. Some fresh air would be good." We found a quieter spot on the balcony, the night air cool against my skin. The city lights twinkled below, casting a glow that felt almost magical. We leaned against the railing, the distance between us shrinking. "Remember that time we got lost in the city after that concert?" I asked, a smile tugging at my lips. Ryan chuckled, nodding. "Yeah, we ended up walking for hours. You were convinced we'd find an all-night diner, but we never did." The memory washed over us, bringing with it a wave of shared history. It felt like old times but with an edge of something more. The air between us crackled with unspoken possibilities. And then, without quite knowing how it happened, I leaned in. It was a soft, tentative kiss, a brush of lips that spoke of what might have been. Ryan hesitated but didn't pull away, and in that moment everything else fell away. It was just us suspended in time. But the moment shattered as quickly as it had formed. Ryan pulled back, a mix of surprise and confusion in his eyes. He started, but words failed him. I felt a pang of regret, the weight of betrayal settling heavily on my shoulders. What had I done? Chloe's laugh drifted out from inside, a stark reminder of the lines I'd crossed. Ryan looked back towards the party, then at me, as if torn between two worlds. My heart pounded, the thrill of the kiss already tainted by what it represented. I'd gotten my revenge, but at what cost? What would you have done, standing there on that balcony? The consequences loomed, and I knew there was no turning back. The next morning I sat alone in the corner of the coffee shop where Chloe and I usually met for our weekend catch-ups. I sipped my latte, the warmth doing little to quell the cold, anxious knot in my stomach. The coffee shop was buzzing, filled with the comforting clatter of cups and quiet chatter, but all I could focus on was the conversation I overheard from the table behind me. "Did you hear about Chloe and Ryan?" a voice said, just above a whisper. My ears pricked up involuntarily. Apparently, something happened at the party last night. I tensed, my hands gripping the cup tighter. My heart raced as I listened, hoping to hear more. Yeah, another voice chimed in. I heard she found out something she wasn't supposed to. Imagine finding out like that. I felt the blood drain from my face. The rumors had already started to spread, and I wasn't sure how much had been revealed. Chloe hadn't called or texted since last night, and a growing sense of dread settled in my chest. The coffee tasted bitter now, but I forced myself to take another sip, trying to look as nonchalant as possible. As if on cue, the door swung open and Chloe walked in. Her eyes scanned the room until they locked onto mine. Her expression was unreadable, but the tightness in her jaw spoke volumes. I swallowed hard, setting my cup down with a trembling hand. She approached slowly, each step heavy with unspoken words. We sat in silence for a moment, the tension between us palpable. So, she finally said, her tone icy, are you going to tell me what really happened? Or should I rely on everyone else's version of the story? My heart sank. Chloe, I paused, searching for the right words, but they refused to come. The betrayal I had committed felt monumental now, impossible to gloss over with excuses. The kiss, she pressed, her eyes boring into mine. Ryan told me everything this morning. Was it worth it? Her question hung in the air, and I felt the sting of tears threatening to fall. I had no answer that could justify what I'd done. I didn't think it through, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. I was hurt, and I wanted you to know what it felt like. Chloe's face crumpled, a mix of hurt and disappointment etched in her features. And you thought this was the way to do it? By going behind my back? I shook my head, words failing me again. The realization of how deeply I had wounded her was overwhelming. Chloe had been more than a friend, she'd been family. And now, because of one impulsive act, that bond was shattered. She stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor, drawing the attention of the nearby tables. I think we need some time apart, she said, her voice steady but laced with pain. I can't trust you right now. I nodded, unable to argue. Watching her walk away felt like losing a part of myself. The coffee shop, once a place of warmth and familiarity, felt foreign and hostile now. What would you do, knowing you just lost a friend forever? I sat there long after she left, staring into my empty cup, wishing desperately I could turn back time. But the damage was done, and there was no mending what I'd broken. What would you have done in my place? When I got back to my apartment, it felt as empty as my chest. The walls seemed to close in, and the silence was deafening. I dropped my keys on the counter and sank into the couch, trying to process what had just happened. It was supposed to be a simple conversation, a chance to clear the air with Mia. But it had spiraled into something much worse. Ryan was waiting, his face lighting up when I walked in. Hey, how did it go? He asked, hopeful. I hesitated, not sure how to break the news. Not great, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. She said she needs space, doesn't trust me. He frowned, sitting down across from me. But you can work it out, right? His optimism was almost painful. Part of me wanted to believe him, to cling to the idea that things could be fixed. But deep down I knew it was more complicated than that. I don't know, Ryan. I really don't. We sat there in silence, the weight of the situation pressing down on us. So what now? Ryan asked, trying to sound casual but failing. I shrugged, unable to come up with a plan. I guess I need to give her the space she asked for. Saying it out loud made it feel final, like a door closing. Ryan leaned back, crossing his arms. I still think you two can work it out, he insisted. You're good together. His words were meant to be reassuring, but they only added to my guilt. Maybe he was right, maybe we were good together once. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd crossed a line, one that couldn't be uncrossed. Every time I replayed our conversation, it felt like an empty victory. I had been so focused on saying my piece, on defending myself, that I hadn't realized how much I'd hurt her. Ryan stood up, pacing the room. You know, sometimes people just need time. Maybe that's all this is. I wanted to believe him, to hold on to that sliver of hope, but it felt like grasping at straws. Yeah, maybe, I said, trying to sound more convinced than I felt. In my mind, I kept replaying her last words, that steady voice tinged with hurt. They echoed in the quiet of the apartment, a constant reminder of my failure. I think we need some time apart. She was right, of course. Trust was fragile, and once broken, it was hard to repair. Ryan stopped pacing and turned to me, an idea lighting up his face. Why don't you write her a letter? Explain how you feel. Sometimes it's easier to put things down on paper. His suggestion caught me off guard. A letter seemed so old-fashioned, but maybe it was what I needed. A chance to say everything I hadn't been able to in person. I'll think about it, I replied, knowing I probably wouldn't. Writing a letter wouldn't change the fact that I'd messed up. It wouldn't erase the look on Mia's face as she walked away. I looked around the apartment, taking in the familiar surroundings that now felt like a stranger's home. Ryan's optimism was unwavering, but mine was crumbling. I realized then that my victory, if it could even be called that, was hollow. Winning an argument meant nothing if it cost me a friendship. As much as I wanted to fix things, I was left with the sinking feeling that some things couldn't be undone. The guilt weighed heavy, settling in like an unwelcome guest. The apartment was still, the only sound the distant hum of traffic outside. I leaned back, closing my eyes, wishing for a reset button. But there was no going back. I'd have to live with the consequences of my actions and hope somehow that time could heal the wounds I'd inflicted. What would you have done in my place? Epilogue. A few months after the fallout, I sat alone in my favorite cafe, swirling a cup of cold brew and watching the world move on without me. Ryan and I, once inseparable, had become distant like strangers. I questioned whether it was anyone's fault, or if it was mine. The revenge I sought for justice had only created a barrier between us. The barista, a stranger, noticed my blank stare and asked if I was okay. I nodded, but inside I was filled with regret. Chloe had cut ties completely, her words echoing in my mind. Mia, I can't do this anymore. It's toxic. What felt like a victory had turned into a bitter defeat, leaving me with a heavy heart and a sense of loneliness that crept in at dusk. As days turned into weeks, I realized I needed to find a new normal. I began to rediscover old hobbies like painting and reading, grounding myself in ways I hadn't felt in years. I learned to forgive myself for my actions and the pain I caused. Time became both an enemy and a friend, healing wounds I thought were too deep to mend. After a fallout with friends, I learned to cope with regret, rediscover myself, and find peace in letting go.